It's time to set the record queer. Have you made Snake today?
Welcome to Setting the Record Queer, a podcast where queer people talk about the pursuits and communities they love. This is episode 12, and it's about Kickstarter video game development. My name is Alexis, my pronouns are it, and she, her, and I'm two of your hosts.
My name's Kaylee, my pronouns are she, her, and I am your final host, even. Your Final Fantasy host.
Kingdom Hearts Final Host Remix.
That just came out.
I don't know anything about Kingdom Hearts. I've watched Kaylee play a few minutes of Kingdom Hearts 3, and it's like, oh, this looks cute, and also like a Disney advertisement.
It's fun. We're not going to spoil it or anything here. But speaking of RPGs, the RPG Valkyries, which I've mentioned quite a number of times on this podcast, we've been putting together one of our 2 yearly speedrunning marathons. This is the February one called RPGs We Love. It's all RPGs. It'll actually start the Sunday after this episode comes out. I'm actually opening for that marathon. I have the first run in it, so be sure to check it out. We've put a lot of work into the schedule, and we're raising money so that a bunch of the Valkyries can go to RPG Limit Break, which is the biggest speedrunning marathon for RPGs. It's going to be a fun time.
I'm really excited to just watch the whole thing. As someone who doesn't run RPGs, as someone who ran Paper Mario the Thousand Year Door 5 times and then gave up because that game is impossible, RPG speedruns are super comfy and fun to watch. Meanwhile, while Kaylee has been planning a speedrunning event, I accidentally started an activist movement. That's sort of been my 2 weeks. So I feel like most of our audience probably knows about the big H-Bomber Guy stream that happened 2 weeks ago or something. If you don't know, famed leftist YouTuber H-Bomber Guy did a charity stream raising money for Mermaids UK, a trans-benefiting charity, by playing Donkey Kong 64 for 50 hours. He did this specifically to spite Graham Linehan, and it was incredible. And this stream featured tons and tons of famous trans people. It was the biggest, real-life crossover event that I've ever seen, and I got the chance to be on it for 25 minutes. I got to discuss the intersection of trans and autistic issues with Laura Kate Dale, BuzzFeed reporter, and tell Chelsea Manning personally to her ears directly how much she's inspired me. It was kind of incredible. But one of the things besides that I did was I accidentally started an activist movement. So most of y'all probably know that we recently came out as plural. That is, there's multiple entities that make up an us. And I'm not really going to get into that for the sake of the podcast, but when I was on H-Bomber Guy's stream, I made it a point to talk about our plurality because it's something that's important to us. And I said at one point, shout outs to Plural Gang. And then the Twitter hashtag Plural Gang started up, and then it didn't stop. And it still hasn't stopped. And it's been kind of incredible seeing this massive, community unity, celebration movement. So yeah, that's what I've been up to. Accidentally changing communities. Oops.
You ever just accidentally a movement?
You ever just accidentally a movement, gamers?
That meme is 20 years old at this point.
It's still funny.
You know, Alexis, there's one thing I've actually been doing for a little while now, but I'm finally at a point where I have enough of a concrete thing that I can talk about it, a very small amount on the podcast, is I actually started making an RPG. And I've written out the script for the whole thing, and I've drawn a bunch of the characters. I've made some of the basic mechanics. Still have a lot of work to do on that. But speaking of game development, I think we have a couple people here with us who are a lot more experienced with that than I am.
Yes. Hello, friends.
Hello.
Hello.
So why don't you introduce yourselves?
So my name is Emma. I also go online by Eniko, and my pronouns are she, her.
My name is Eric June. My pronouns are they or he, and I go online as Critterdust.
And you two are part of a gaming company. Do y'all want to introduce your employer, TM?
Well,
Which is you?
I guess that's me. Yeah,
Yeah.
I am the employer. So we both are working at in/around Kitsune Games, which was started in March 2013. We are currently working on Lore Finder, which is our queer cosmic horror metroidvania, because you need a lot of words in there. And we also made the turn-based possession roguelike Myth Boss and hat-based puzzle game Ultra Hat Dimension.
2013 is a long time. I'll be honest, I did not know that Kitsune Games had been going for that long. Also, I thought it was pronounced Kitsune, so like you learn something new every day.
Yeah, I mean my nickname is supposed to be Eniko too instead of Eniko, but I've just given in to the way Americans say it because it's not worth fighting.
Oh no, I've been saying it that way too.
I'm even a Japanese graduate.
Yeah, I mean, I just kind of assumed we were going by Japanese pronunciation, but like, hey, you're valid. You're valid. Speaking of your validity, why don't y'all each give us a rundown of your history with game development?
Okay, so I guess like it's probably for like most game developers, it starts like when you're a kid, right? So I had a bunch of stuff like RPG Maker when I was a kid, or like trying to make my own tabletop type stuff. But like the actual game development stuff is like I think I don't actually even remember what year it was. I think it was like 2014 or something. I made like a like mobile game with some friends from college, and like we released it online and sold it to a publisher and made like absolutely nothing. But we finished a thing, so it was cool. And feeling kind of inspired by that, I then bounced around projects until I made this small kind of like this indie game called Earthtongue, which is like this kind of it's like this like ecology simulation type game that I kind of mostly made just because I was sad that I didn't own a terrarium. So I was just like, oh heck, I'll program my own terrarium and have that instead. And then after I'd done it, I was all like, oh, people are actually interested in this thing I made. Okay, I'll also sell it then. And that did better than I was expecting, considering I was thinking I was just going to make myself a thing. And since then, I've sort of bounced between projects, but now I'm here working with Eniko on Lore Finder.
And how about you, Emma?
Oh man, how long do we have?
As long as you want.
So my game development journey started like in the early 90s because I'm like 35, which means I'm too old to be on the internet, according to some people. And I played a lot of games because my dad was one of the earliest computer programmers, and he like programmed when programming involved a stack of punch cards. And if you dropped them, then you had to like reorganize them to get the program sorted out. And I did programming in QBasic and DOS, and I was very hard to teach. First, my father wanted to teach me, and he was like, you got to make Snake. I'm like, I know how to make Snake. I don't want to make Snake. And then he's like, okay, so I'm not going to teach you that. And then a year later, my brother wanted to teach me, and he was like, you got to make Snake. And I'm like, I don't want to make Snake. I know how to make Snake. I'm not going to make Snake. And he's like, well, if you're not gonna, I'm not going to teach you. So at that point, I just taught myself, and I moved on to Visual Basic. Spent a long time trying to make an MMO, which never happened because of course it didn't. Yeah.
Okay, so two things. First, if you out there listening to this podcast are a punch card programmer and are queer, we want to talk to you. Second, how do you feel about snakes, just like in general?
I love them.
I hate them.
I have a deep fascination for all animals, especially ones that people don't tend to like. So if people don't like so spiders get extra points from me, right? As does like weird things in the abyss of the ocean and sort of like that. So I'm pretty happy with snakes. I like their cute faces actually, and I sort of like how they crawl out of their own skin every now and then, which is pretty kind of awesome.
But do you like the game Snake?
It's okay. It's pretty good on like old flip phones back when you had like the physical keys that you had to push. I felt like Snake felt really good on that control scheme compared to like how almost anything feels on like an old Nokia phone, right? But it's okay as a game. I guess it's fun.
I never liked it. So well, to make a long story short, I basically puttered around with video games for a long time, never really finishing anything. And then I made Myth Boss, and that's a good story because I was studying in Japan for half a year, and it was December. I still remember it. It was brutally cold because we were in the Japanese mountains, and someone was like, "Oh, Ludum Dare is on." I don't know if you guys do. You know Ludum Dare?
Vaguely, but why don't you explain it for our listeners?
So Ludum Dare is a 72-hour game development competition where in the 72-hour space and some people do it in 48 hours because there's two categories. It's basically like speed running for game development. So you make a game as fast as you can, and it has a theme. And I think the theme was you are the villain. And so I came up with this idea of a little imp in a dungeon, and it can't do anything besides take over other creatures that it defeats, and then it has to learn their abilities, and it wants to be the final boss of the dungeon. So I made that. I spent one day on it, and then my Japanese friends were like, hey, do you want to go out with us and eat sushi and then go to free time karaoke from like midnight until 5 a.m. in the morning? I was like, heck yeah, because, who wouldn't want to do that? And then the third day came and I was like, this game is actually kind of fun. I should maybe finish this. So I pulled like an all-nighter, barely managed to finish it. And then I had to do a presentation the following day at university in Japanese. And I just went up to the thing and I was like, I'm too tired to brain. I'm sorry. And then I went to sit back down.
Oh my god.
I've never witnessed such true bravery before.
Fortunately, my professor could laugh about it. So that was mid-boss, and then a friend of mine said, oh yeah, if you polish this up and sell it for a couple of bucks, we'll buy it. And one of his friends, who I didn't even know, he wrote a review of mid-boss and said that it was great. And that was the first time I actually felt like, after like 15 years of making games, first time I felt like my game was worth anything. So I was like, okay, I'm gonna do this. And then I went way overboard with it and developed Midboss for 5 years, and then it came out in like May 2017.
Oh, game dev. Oh, game dev.
Yeah.
One of the things that's nice with working with Eniko is that I'm kind of like ambitious. I very much like to indulge the kind of ambitious creative part of me that really that always wants to like add like weirder or more things, which also can make it hard to finish projects. And Eniko is like has a really, really good like knowledge of like what needs to happen in order to actually have a thing be done by certain times, which is like incredibly important, because otherwise you have nothing, right? Like
And still all my projects come out late. So, game development.
it's even if you're super good at it, it's impossible to completely avoid it. But just the fact that it's like that like something like the Kickstarter can happen at all is like, oh, this is really good planning. Like,
So I think it's clear that you two have like very much like a dynamic, and you clearly like know how to work with each other. So where did Kitsune Games come into the picture?
I'm not technically I'm not technically a part of Eniko's company. I'm more like kind of like a collaborator on this project, sort of. I guess it's a little bit more complicated than that, but I'll let Eniko.
He's working on a contract basis.
Ah.
Yeah.
Because we don't have the money to hire someone like as a regular thing. So we're collaborating on Lore Finder, the two of us. So I'm Kitsune Games and Eric June is Lore Finder, but not necessarily Kitsune Games, but Kitsune Games right now. But that's very common in the industry.
Kitsune Games and Kitsune Games accessories.
Exactly.
The way that I essentially got involved was Eniko made it. I was just sort of browsing Twitter, and I saw Eniko made a tweet that was like, oh, I want to take the jam game that she had made of like the original version of Lore Finder, and she was talking about how she's like interested in fleshing it out into a full game and wants to see if anybody like would like to help and do that, right? And like something about that was sort of a little bit inherently appealing to me, because like having the first step already there in the game sort of means that it's like, oh, okay, this is actually like already on the path to being a deliverable like at the start. So that's kind of like inherently appealing to me. But so I went to play it to see if I thought it had interesting like ideas in it, and it did. I really like the like kind of like metroidvania type thing, but like where the world is like changing as you go, which like is really interesting compared to how like the games normally like don't do that, but there's a lot of backtracking. Anyways, so I played it, and then I was all like, oh, but you know what? I don't actually have time to do this. So I just said, but you know what I'm going to do is I'm going to make a giant list of things that I would do. Like I messaged Eniko and I was like, well, right now the pro tag is a dude, and that's kind of boring to me.
It's not technically true.
Oh, really?
Yeah, I actually designed the character to be like gender neutral. Like you can read into it.
Oh. Okay, well, unfortunately,
I
I failed to read it properly, which is also, I guess, probably a common issue with that sort of character. I've seen that before. But in any case, I just had a lot of like little thoughts about like just I would change this, or I would flesh this out in this way, or this is how I would do this, and so and so. And I just kind of was like, oh, if you're interested in hearing my critique thoughts on this, here it is, because I thought it was cool. But I don't have time to work on this. But then Eniko was like, oh, but these thoughts are super good. Are you sure you don't want to work on this? And I was like, I can't without I don't have enough money to do it. And I might be, maybe I'm misremembering some parts, so maybe Eniko can tell me if I've forgotten some parts. But then we sort of were like, well, if we plan out a Kickstarter, then it will be viable. So and I was like, okay, actually that sounds like a pretty cool idea. And that's sort of how I ended up getting involved, was just running in to give feedback, and then I guess ended up getting actually involved.
Yeah, and I know I've seen Eric June's work for a long time on Twitter, and I like Earthbound, and
Tongue.
I've seen Earthtongue. I'm
I mean, you
so
probably
sorry.
also like Earthbound, so
I also like Earthbound.
Just take the credit that you made Earthbound and go with it. It's yours. You've done it. You did it. You made one of the most successful RPGs of all time.
Isn't that Undertale now?
Well, according to the internet, they're the same game.
I could see that. But yeah, I saw Eric June's work, and they were working on this platformer with I think it was a wizard girl or a moth girl.
It was originally originally like a witch, a little witch girl, but I decided to make it furry, and so then it became a moth girl. And that was Dreamsweeper.
I just really liked Eric June's style, and everything just felt really stylized and good. And that's something that I'm not as good at myself. So I was like, maybe if we work together, we can, get the best of both worlds. So we have very different approaches to how we make games. I'm much more a systems kind of girl. And I think Eric June is much more into the style and the aesthetic and the juiciness of the game development.
I would say that that's probably primarily where I end up thinking a lot about is that.
So you've mentioned for every project that we've referenced today that it started with a game jam. Have all your projects started with game jams?
Basically, yeah. Midboss was a game jam, and then I made it into a big game. Ultra Hat Dimension was almost exactly as it is now. In the game jam, except it had way less levels and a few less mechanics. And then Lore Finder, yeah, that was a game jam too. I like game jams, and they are a really good way of testing if a concept resonates with people. There is the downside, though, that sometimes a concept, when you do it in a simple way, seems really promising, like Midboss, which was okay, you possess the thing and then you learn the abilities, and it all sounds really simple, but it took me 9 months of redesigns over and over and over to try and make that work in a full product. But fortunately, Ultra Hat Dimension and Lore Finder have been much smoother. But yeah, game jams, that's where it's at.
Seems like a really good excuse to prototype stuff. I've actually never. Oh, I forgot. I once hosted a game jam called Indie Quilt, but almost I shouldn't talk about it because it was it was a mess for me. But it seems like a really good way to prototype stuff, because the forced scoping means that you have to pick a thing that you can
that you can actually pull off, that doesn't require too much content, that doesn't require too much complexity and fiddly UI and stuff. So yeah, it's a great way to get a good gimmick.
So we briefly mentioned it, but let's talk about Ultra Hat Dimension for a bit, because, I mean, it's one of the games that you have, listed on the forefront of the Kitsune Games website. It's in your Twitter bio.
It's clearly a passion project.
Yes, that's the word I was looking for.
Well, so Ultra Hat Dimension is not, I have to say, one of my passion projects. I'm sorry. The thing is, Ultra Hat Dimension came out of a game jam where I collaborated with 3 other people. So there was me, and there was Wolfie Cakes, who I think draws a lot of porn. There was Lena Lorray, who is one of my best friends, and there is Yuzuki, who did the music. And so basically, I had this idea about it was a false flag kind of theme. I can't remember what it was exactly. And I was like, okay, you're a soldier with a flag, and then you go into other units of soldiers and you take them over with your flag and make them think that you're one of them, and then you lead them, and then and they were like, yeah, that's a great idea. So I went to bed, and then I got up, and then they were like, okay, it's gonna be weird blobby guys with hats and you punch things. And I'm like, okay. And they basically came up with all the mechanics. And it's really, if it's anyone's passion project, it's Lena's passion project, because she did all the puzzles. I basically did the coding and the additional artwork and some additional sound work, but she really made that game come together.
Cool. Next, Eric June, why don't you tell us a little bit about Earthtongue?
Okay, cool. Oh, yes. Okay. Yeah, I guess I kind of already ended up giving a bit of it earlier, but I was working on some other game idea at the time of like some sort of RPG sort of thing, and suddenly had another of I occasionally get like fits of feeling like I wish I had become an ecologist, because I didn't. I became a computer scientist, even though I don't really like programming actually, but I can do it. And also was playing around with ideas like I should get a terrarium, and then I was all like, well, I'll just make my own little thing that's not for real, and I just won't tell anyone because I'm embarrassed to be like just indulging this idea to suddenly make like a small side project. Like I feel like this is probably one of the most dangerous things for a game developer to do, is to just, oh, I have this idea for this small side project, I'm going to go start doing this thing instead. And the moment that I started like making it, it was like my brain lit on fire. And this is not a healthy thing to do, but I couldn't not do it. And I was like, okay, well, I don't want to spend too much time on this, so I'll make this tiny little personal for me terrarium that I can watch grow and creatures inhabit it in 2 weeks. So I just spent the whole day just making like this like generation for the soil. Okay, like what's the life system work? Okay, so like nutrient falls down. I was kind of inspired by the bottom of the ocean, how like the effluvia of dead creatures slowly like rains down on the surface at the bottom of the ocean. So I was like, okay, but what about that on the surface? There's just nutrient falls out of the sky. And so I started like making some kind of simulated mold, and then I was like, well, something needs to eat the mold. Obviously that'd be more interesting. So then I made some beetles, and then I was like, well, something should eat the beetle. So I made this other thing, and I was like, well, something should eat the corpses. So then I made like scavengers, and then I was like, oh, but what about something with multiple life cycles? Like, so like there was very little planning that went into here. I just sort of like every step of the way made another thing, and eventually I started posting GIFs of it because I thought it was fun. And the like reaction it ended up getting was like people were shockingly interested in it, which I just was not expecting, because like quite honestly, it is a small personal toy of a game, and like the 2 weeks were up and I wasn't done with the game. I had done pretty much everything I set out to do, but everybody was so excited about it that I was all like, well, probably I should just make this into an actual thing. So then I spent the next 2 weeks doing actual like polish and stuff, like making it so that there's a UI that's not just some like crud that I looked at, right? Like I wasn't going to be editing stuff in the Unity UI anymore for just my own personal like benefit. So I had to actually go and make like a menu system, blah blah blah. And then by the end of it, I released it and got a surprising amount of like reception. Like, people like praised it a lot for being kind of unique, which I suppose makes sense, because it's like it's not like it was inspired by any video games, right? Like it was inspired by the physical phenomena of a terrarium. And I also wanted to tie in my the like, you know how like I said I wanted to be an ecologist. A big part of the game I wanted to build around like the idea of like you're studying stuff. So like the game doesn't really give you a lot of information on how the creatures work or exist, so you have to like watch them and figure out for yourself. Like you have to like watch like what does this creature is eating, so that I know like how they survive, and you have to manually observe their behavior, and only after you keep them alive for so long that you definitely understand them does the game actually like give you a like research journal type thing that tells you about them. Because I wanted to emulate that same feeling of like using your own observational skills to like kind of do some low-key science of observing, and kind of tried to channel that fascination. And then once I'd finished it, I was no longer feeling distressed by my I want to be an ecologist for a while.
I think it's really cool how you just took like this completely unrelated sort of passion and brought a unique spin to it in a video game form. I don't really have a question on that. I just think that's really cool.
Thank you.
So I should turn this into a real game. Is definitely a game developer thing, I think, especially for indies. I also wanted to, I was sitting here thinking about my earlier response about, is Ultra Hat Dimension a passion project? I just wanted to briefly touch on that again, because I do this for a living as a full-time developer. So I do have to make it clear that I am into Ultra Hat Dimension, and I like Mid Boss, and I am very excited about Lore Finder. But in every project that we do at Kitsune Games, there is a compromise between what I am super excited about and what will actually be able to, keep me fed and keep my cat fed and that kind of thing. I do have some stuff I do on the side that isn't that way, but that doesn't really make me much money.
I'm looking forward to like reading some like transcriptions of like the official like the file in the drawer at Kitsune Games labeled cat compromises. I'm looking forward to reading those later.
That's a fun term.
Speaking of those side projects, Eniko, you're working on a Pico 8, which for those listening who aren't aware, it's a retro game console that never actually existed.
Yeah, fantasy console. That's what they call it.
You're working on a, might I say, very ambitious game called Bravely Bound for that system. So why don't you tell us a bit about that?
So that is definitely my passion project. So that is basically a lesbian romance story in an RPG and a JRPG, classic, Super Nintendo style JRPG. That's really what I want to make, but there's not enough money in it. So now I have to talk about my passion project. That's way harder. I'm not as good at that. So initially, I grew up with the Super Nintendo and all the best games were on the Super Nintendo. So at some point I was like, I want to make a Mode 7 3D engine for funsies. So I did. And then for the longest time I had that and did nothing with it. And I was like, well, what if I make like an RPG with it that is kind of like Golden Sun, except with Mode 7 instead of fake 3D. And then I make it gay. And I put a cat slime in it.
Can you give us a brief rundown of what Mode 7 is?
Mode 7 is like Super Mario Kart and F-Zero on the Super Nintendo. It's a 3D-like effect that isn't quite actual 3D, and it is only flat, usually on the ground. So it is a flat sort of 3D. It was a special mode on the Super Nintendo, which is why they call it Mode 7, and it has a very distinctive look.
Okay, carry on.
I love it.
Yeah, I'm a big fan too. I just want to make sure everyone can understand it. Carry on.
Yeah, that makes total sense. So and this was when I was already doing full-time games. So I was like, well, how can I make this a hobby thing and still get actual progress done? And I was like, okay, I'll make it episodic and in the browser. And, so you have episode 1. So I make episode 1 and then I make episode 2 and I release episode 2. It's kind of like a webcomic if a video game were a webcomic. That format I like the format, but I never really got enough free time to work on it. And so it kind of petered out. And then I got the Pico 8, and that is a fantasy console. And it's super limited, and you can make tiny little games with it and not much more. So obviously my first inclination was, how do I break this? How do I make this do way more than it is supposed to do? And so I started doing that, and people started paying attention. And I decided to make a Bravely Bound prequel. So I have the story for Bravely Bound, at least the first season all worked out in my head. And this is the prequel story to that story, which takes place in the past. And it's called Bravely Bound 0. And that's the game that I'm making for Pico 8. And you can find that on my Patreon, which you can also give me money for if you want me to make this game, I guess.
We can put a link in the show notes.
And so yeah, that's Bravely Bound, and that if I could work on that for a living, I would be deliriously happy, but I don't think that's gonna happen anytime soon. Also, cat slime.
Cat slime.
The cat slime that is the icon on the Twitter account for that game is the cutest thing in the world.
Yeah, that's at Bravely Bound. So I actually just had a regular slime.
Ah! Oh, it's so good! Oh, it's so good!
That's the game's mascot.
Oh, I want to pet it. Oh, that's so good.
It's a slime. It'd be gooey.
It's worth it. I don't care that is a touch sensation that will drive me bonkers. It's worth it.
Does the cat slime have cat fur? How does that work with the slime?
No, it's slime. Just slime,
Okay, cool.
Slime in the shape of a cat. So I just had a regular slime sprite, and that was one of the first sprites I did. And I saw on Twitter, do you guys know the fat cat pet from Final Fantasy 14, the MMO? It's like this semi-sphere with like this happy face. And I was like, that semi-sphere looks kind of like the semi-sphere of my slime monster. So I'm going to make a cat slime.
Important game dev tips. Always compare the hemispheres.
Yeah, it's very important. Geometry is a thing.
Wow, that thing is sort of halfway towards becoming a cat slime.
Yeah, but the plushie is like even more, so it doesn't like have the feet. It's just a blob because it's like lying down.
Oh, that's ideal.
Perfect. It's perfect. Anyways, Kaylee, why don't we talk about Kickstarter?
Lore Finder, as you've mentioned, got funded through a Kickstarter campaign. How would you say that running through a Kickstarter campaign has influenced development? I will say that I found out about the game through the Kickstarter campaign. I think I found out about it because past guest Xandra retweeted the Kickstarter, and I'm like, this looks amazing, and I need to give it money.
Did she? I did not know that she had retweeted it. That's cool.
It's okay, so it's made it possible to be more than basically what it is, right, as the demo, because like the practical reality of game development, right? But it's also like I mean I guess it's almost hard for me to say how it's influenced because what it's done is it's made it possible, right? Like because I guess it proves the idea as a game developer, if you're making something, right? Like you're definitely gonna have this horrible crushing thing is what if actually nobody actually cares when you make it, right? And the Kickstarter, aside from giving you like crucial funding, also is able to help tell you no, like actually people do care. In fact, they care enough to give it twice as much as it like or almost, right? And you also kind of benefit, I think, from the early feedback. The Kickstarter itself is very just marketing, and I think mood wise it's really important to get to feel like you've made it to like a finish line, even if it's like a finish line that's like you've hit a checkpoint, sort of like is I guess what it feels like on the way to the end of the level. And that's a very good feeling just for rewarding the part of your brain that needs to be rewarded to give you dopamine. So like I don't know, that's a whole lot of disconnected thoughts that I think are sort of it. The fundamental is that it made it possible.
And I think another thing that really helps with that is that it really pulled into focus like, oh, we got to make a minimum viable product. Like the demo is a game. It's a full game. It has a title screen. It has a speedrun mode. It has all these things. It has a start, a middle, and an end. It's not the best game. It's not the longest game, but it is a game, and we made that. And that was, I think, the hardest part of the Kickstarter is like trying to cram so much into this demo, even though we didn't really have the resources to make the demo in the first place.
Were there, I mean, you just mentioned that. Were there any other drawbacks, do you think, of Kickstarter development? No is an okay answer.
I messed up my shoulder pretty hard during the Kickstarter. That
Oh,
was
no.
definitely a drawback. Yeah, I messed it up when I released Mid-Boss the first time, and then I messed it up again when I was doing the Lore Finder Kickstarter, because some of the development got behind, and I had like already booked myself for everything else that needed to be doing, and I needed to jump in and do some other stuff as well. So I was like just working sun up to getting up, work, go to bed, sleep, rinse, repeat, no weekends, weeks straight. And I think Eric June also just had some extremely late nights. So that's definitely a drawback that the Kickstarter thing, when you can't do it without a demo nowadays, basically. And getting that demo done when you really need the funds from the Kickstarter in order to even be able to do that is just really brutal.
Yeah. The deadline of it sort of helps you condense your design, but it also can force you into uncomfortable crunch time.
I feel like the Kickstarter, as it appears, is, very much a community-driven process just because, you need to spread the word, people get excited, they start pushing things forward. What sort of indie game development community would you say? How would you describe that?
How would I describe our community around the Kickstarter and the game?
Around the Kickstarter and the game, and in the wider sphere of your social world as a game developer.
Well, I guess I'll answer that one since I was mostly the one pushing the Kickstarter and the community a lot. I think the Lore Finder community in particular is amazing. It's really great. We ran a speedrun competition, which I believe you took part in.
Yes, I did. It was
Yeah.
a lot of fun.
I don't remember what place. you
Not that
got.
good.
We'll get to that a bit later, though.
But that was really great, and I was afraid that we'd run the speedrun competition, and I'd be like, because I love speedrunning, as you might have noticed by the fact that I keep calling game jams the speedrunning of game development, and I was afraid that nobody would do it, and I would have to like put in a time myself to get like the top 3 filled out. But fortunately that did not happen, and people like really took to it and did some amazing things, and that was great. In general, our audience is very heavily queer, which is amazing, and very female as well. There's obviously tons of guys and, cis people and straight people and that kind of thing.
And that kind of thing.
That kind of thing.
Oh, those straights.
Those.
Those
They're
straights.
always at it with their tricks.
Their speedrunning tricks.
And I think I've really cultivated that kind of audience over the years by, trying to show myself and our community that we're safe to be around. And I think that's very important. And it was very nice to see that the community reacted so well to it. So the main character is non-binary in Lore Finder, and because of the era it's set in, they're female-bodied, but they also have a girlfriend, and she is also queer by virtue of dating this non-binary person. And we got a lot of non-binary people who were really into the game because there's just not a lot of representation for it. And like, there's Luca, and are there any other NB games?
There's Turing from 2040. 2048 was the phone game. What's the game? What's the game with Turing?
2084.
Read only. 2084. That's the one.
I think.
Turing
Oh
is a
god,
good
I hope
beat
that's
boop.
not wrong.
By Midboss. By Midboss the studio and not Midboss the game. But I didn't know Turing was NB.
Yeah, I don't think. I mean, I'm not heavily
Yeah.
familiar with the game, and as far as we understand, Turing is gender, robot.
The main character
Hmm.
can be NB as well. That's up to the player.
Actually, come to think of it, I have another game that has a sort of NB character, but that's Midboss, because the imp specifically does not have a gender.
That imp is valid. Gender, ambition.
The imp's pronouns are
I can
its.
think of a lot of games that
I love
have
it.
really bad non-binary representation that are really just people not understanding what trans people are, but that's about it.
It's a situation where you get to pick, but so you have a, which I think is a little bit different than having a dedicated like non-binary protagonist. But I really like the fail better games like Sunless Seas and now Skies, which I've got to play because it like just came out. But they always have like non-binary options when you're making your character, and they've also got a lot of like non-binary NPCs that are just sort of like casually referenced to as like they or something, and it's
Hell
not
yeah.
like made a big deal about or in a way that's uncomfortable, if that
I
makes
think
sense,
you
right?
can
Like,
play as a non-binary protagonist in Ultima 1, but
Oh,
yeah,
really?
but then
Wow.
all the future Ultimas you can't.
Gendered, yeah. And then in Ultimate, you can't even be a woman anymore.
Those games went back in terms of having
Wow.
Yeah.
good representation.
Do you remember how we wound up deciding that Casey was non-binary? I don't remember, which is bad.
I guess we sort of just drifted into it.
Yeah, it just felt right.
It's not like they need a reason, you know?
Yeah.
Speaking
Yeah.
of which, though, it's clear that like this is important to y'all and to Kitsune Games to like, bring this representation, and then I'm not going to sit here and prattle on about why representation is important. This is literally a podcast about representation. We're past that 101 level stuff, but I'm just curious what the culture at Kitsune Games like, and like what, not even why this is so important, because I think that's very clear. But yeah, tell us about Kitsune Games, I guess.
And it's queerness.
Yes.
So I am a queer person. I used to use different labels, but now it's complicated, so I just say I'm queer. And I made the studio, so I'm like, that's what I want in my studio. And I used to do communication in college, so I know all about vision and mission statements and corporate communication and that kind of thing. So I was like, okay, that's going to be my mission statement, is to make games, traditional games, but make them accessible and diverse. And I remember watching The Legend of Korra, and I knew there was some gay shit in that. And it just happened at the very end, which took me a little bit by surprise, but I was so happy when it happened. And I just remember that, and I was like, it's so important that people can see themselves in their media. And sorry if I'm doing representation 101 a little bit
Oh no,
here.
go for it. You can do whatever you want. You are the guest. You are the focus here.
And it's just so lacking in games, and if there's something I can do to help that, then please, because everyone else is already, doing Gruff McGrufferson or the dad archetype and that kind of thing. And it's like, we don't need more of that. And also, I don't know why, but we wind up working with a lot of queer people, like more than half of the people that we regularly collaborate with and have, services that we contract out and that kind of thing are queer, and there are a lot of women working at Kitsune Games and non-binary people, and it just kind of came together, and I'm so happy that we have this diverse, inclusive, game development family almost, and a matching fan base. It's really great.
Heck yeah.
I totally don't ask this question out of personal desire or anything, but how would you recommend someone to get started in game dev?
Just start making a thing. If you're just starting, it's probably not necessary to completely think about it like a business thing yet. Like, you probably want to do that later, but really what you need to do is do whatever it is that it takes to make a thing that you want to make. So if this is using RPG Maker, if this is using Game Maker, if this is using like pre-made assets in some way, like whatever it takes, just make a thing that you think is interesting, and then the next step, think about it after that.
Don't obsess too much about quality, because this
yes.
is something that really stood out to me. In game development, more is more. So the best example was when I was at an event and with a lot of indie games, and I saw this little indie game where it looked really stylish and kind of nice. It didn't look amazing, but it looked nice. And you could see that if you looked at any individual piece that made up the entire screen, that the quality was fairly actually low. But it's much better to have a bunch of low quality stuff so that there's variety and busyness to your game. I mean, this is very on art, but it applies to everything. It's better to have a lot of stuff that isn't maybe perfect than it is to have one or two things that are perfect, because one or two things that are perfect is not enough to make a game come alive. So I think definitely quantity over quality is a thing in game development.
Someone who is terrible at drawing, that's good news.
Do y'all have any recommendations for, like, if someone knows nothing about how to, like, actually make a game, do you have any recommendations for, engines, tools, resources, like some specifics to help someone get started?
If you know how to code, then Unity's going to be good. And if you're willing to sit through, you don't have to know how to code to use Unity. If you're willing to sit through, like, okay, if you think that 20 hours of like tutorials and training is going to be like a suitable way for you to start and then get into things, I think that you could probably do some pretty good stuff with Unity as like a complete, like, and that's actually not that unreasonable, right? Like, you could do some cool stuff pretty quickly. If you don't, depending on what you're trying to make, like I do think that RPG Maker still has value, even though it's sort of like the classic, like everybody uses this to make. If you're making an RPG Maker is pretty good, especially if you're willing to do your own like art. Even if it's bad, it's better if it's yours, right? Or like Game Maker, I understand is a bit easier to get into for somebody who's like brand new and
Doesn't
like
that
fresh.
require a lot of programming too, though, Game Maker? I don't know. I make all my own engines, so I have no idea.
Game Maker has an internal like event type system, I believe. Like you do have to sort of learn how Game Maker does its own version of coding, but I don't think you actually write.
It's you kind of get the choice, someone who is working with that right now.
Oh, cool. I actually don't. So I probably know less about it than you do as far as that system goes. I've just seen a lot of people who are new use it.
You can basically choose between a drag and drop programming language and a actual programming language, and as someone from a programming background, I've been using the latter.
As someone with less strong of a programming background, when I did stuff with Game Maker, because I did a game class thing, although game dev isn't really my thing, I use drag and drop.
Nice. I want to use more drag and drop on some things, actually, because sometimes it's just easier. I like Unity personally, but that's just me.
I am code all the way. I mean, I have a reputation in the indie game development community for being crazy and rolling all my own stuff. And often when I talk about some weird stuff I'm working on, my peers will be like, well, I understood some of the words you said. So I am maybe not the best person to ask, although I think Pico 8 could also be a good one if you have some programming background. But even if you are trying to learn some programming, because it has a built-in editor for like a map and sprites and that kind of thing. So you just need to use some Lua code, and you can keep it fairly simple, especially also because it is locked to a frame rate. So if you know that your game is going to be 30 FPS or 60 FPS, you can just be like, okay, do this much every frame. If you're developing like a modern game for PC, then you can't just frame lock anymore, which means you need to deal with variable frame timings, and oh my god, it's such a headache. But there's none of that with Pico 8. So I think Pico 8 is actually a relatively good way to get started.
I've got one more. I've got another thought actually, because I've had a friend who recently tried to get into it, and I am I'm thinking about like the stuff that they've kind of been going through, and I think there's like a couple also I think points that are important to make. Like if you're scared off by like, oh, with like Peak Away I have to do a little bit of programming but I don't know any. One of the things is that like the human brain is sort of kind of amazing, and you can learn a skill. Like you right now, whoever's listening to it, right? Like you can learn a skill if you want to learn that skill. Like you can just do it. You literally can just do it. It's not too late, and you don't even have to learn everything. Like you don't have to become an expert to make things you want. You just have to get like you just have to get up to your knees in it, and you could totally do that. And it's okay if like the internal guts of your game are messy, or it's coded weird, or you like, oh, I didn't like. I've seen lots of examples of really good indie games doing stuff like the person's like, I didn't know how to do classes, so the whole game is in one class, which is the most nightmarish thing I've ever heard of. But in the end, it doesn't matter because the game's good, and it's like, listen, just whatever it takes for you to do it, right? Like you can learn up to what level you want to learn at. That's all that matters.
So I want to jump in there. I can't say how I have this information, but I have it on very, very good authority that Terraria's code was a mess. Just like awful.
I mean, hey, and that's a good video
Yeah,
game,
that is
so.
Terraria's fun.
Also, clearly, if you wanna start learning how to make games, you should program Snake.
I have programmed Snake. I have programmed Snake 3 or 4 times.
That's how you do it.
I've never programmed Snake once.
Now you know how I felt.
I should do it once just to have
no
done
more
it.
Snake.
I think I did a game with a snake. I did a little like text RPG once, and I think a snake might have been one of the enemies. Anyways, let's move on. So final question before we hop into our performance showcase. With y'all's upcoming projects, what are our release dates or like projected release expectations, TM?
So for Lore Finder, that is estimated at December 2019. It may be a couple months later, but we hope not. Ultra Hat Dimension will be out sometime this first half year of 2019, hopefully. Bravely Bound Zero will be out someday, maybe, hopefully.
Well, it's really cool watching you release dev updates at the very least.
Mm-hmm.
So yeah, let's talk about that Lore Finder demo.
Yeah.
Alrighty.
So why don't we start this off? Kaylee, you played the heck out of this demo.
I have played this demo about 60 or 70 times.
Why don't you give us sort of a
gravy.
rundown of the demo? Like just from start to finish, what would a player kind of run into?
So basically what you have in this demo, the most basic thing is that you start with this tiny area and the game is a metroidvania, so you start with this tiny area where the only thing you can really get to is this one parchment scroll, which gives you more abilities, that lets you see more stuff. And then you pick up and then you can access another area, because now that you are able to see things, the whole world changes. And that's a theme. The world changes every time you pick up any of these. Then you pick up another one that lets you shoot these, shadow bullets in addition to the gun you have. And then you can get to an area where you can fight a mini boss. And then you got acid resistance for the mini boss. And then after that, you were able to get a thing that lets you jump up walls. And then you were able to use that to get to the boss at the end. And if you want to follow along what we're talking about here, there is a link to the demo in the show notes. I highly encourage playing it. It is a ton of fun. The speedrunning competition for it is over, but there's actually still an SRCom page that you can still submit to, so you can still run it if you want to.
That's speedrun.com.
Yes.
And we've talked about speedrunning a lot this episode. If you're not up to speed on what speedrunning is, it's Kaylee and I's hobby. But also we talked about it in episode 0 and in our recent live show. So feel free to go listen to those. Also, I just want to say that the boss of the demo looks like a friend.
He is a good dog.
He's a good doggo.
He's a good doggo when he lines up correctly and you don't lose 10 seconds.
There's some crazy stuff that people figured out, like I remember people talking about like in the speedrun tactics, and they're like the Algorot's behavior is like, this is the pattern that is like automatically built in, like it will either come out of this hole or this hole, but never this one after this one. And I'm sitting here going, I didn't code that. I didn't make it. Why is it doing that? Like,
Yeah.
thank you, speedrunners.
That's actually a good segue. I did kind of want to ask, with the demo, what sort of inspired the speedrunning contest?
That was all me. I was like, I've been meaning to somehow coerce people into speedrunning my games for like ages, but I made a turn-based roguelike, which is not super speedrunnable, and then I made a puzzle game, which is also not super speedrunnable. And I was like, wait, this is a platformer. This is totally speedrunnable. We're gonna do a contest, and we're gonna give people trophies. The top 3 people get a trophy in the final game, and it's gonna be amazing. And yeah, that's kind of how it went. I was just really desperate for anyone to speedrun my games.
It was a really good
I can
idea.
promise you that I'll speedrun the full version when it comes out.
I'm excited to watch it.
Anyway, let's kind of step through the design process and kind of the thoughts behind kind of segment to segment here. And if you're listening to this at home at your computer, I would encourage you to download this demo. A link will be in the show notes and play along. It's playable in your browser. Super fun. If not, if you can't right now, I would recommend checking it out a little later.
Yeah, there's also, you can go watch Kaylee's speedrun of it and stuff. Okay, so like the first thing that caught my eye with the demo, and I guess with the game as a whole, is the protagonist's basic weapon. So the protagonist has a gun. It's like a revolver, just like, like a regular old gun. And what was really interesting to me about it is that it fires really slowly, and it stops the character when you fire it, and it is a really powerful shot, which I think is a really interesting departure from like the traditional, starting weapon, which is often, little tiny pew pew. Think Metroid, really. So I'm curious, what was the rationale and the inspiration there, and then also what went into designing that?
So, because Lore Finder was a Ludum Dare game, you can actually, I disabled it on itch.io, the web version, but you can still find the downloadable version of the Ludum Dare game somewhere, and you can see kind of how it evolved. And you had a fireball and a gun, and as soon as you got the fireball, because it did more damage, the gun was basically completely obsolete. And something else that happened in the Ludum Dare version is that because projectiles, well, no, actually, fireballs. For some reason, there was a bug where if a fireball hit another fireball, they would cancel each other out. So you could use it defensively. And that was a very interesting mechanic. And so we talked a lot about the gun, a lot. In the early stages of the demo development and what we wanted to do, because we had these two different shooty abilities, and we don't want to make stuff that you get an upgrade and the old thing is completely irrelevant. So my idea was to make the gun kind of like the showstopper, but it's harder to use. I think that was my idea. The rooting, was that my idea? Was that your idea?
I actually can't remember.
Maybe it was both our ideas. We'll just say it is.
Yeah.
And I like that because it kind of gives that feeling of Silent Hill or Resident Evil where the controls are kind of clunky, but on purpose to drive down the horror aspect. And then we decided to make that a raycast ability because that's just so much better.
That's right. It used to send out a projectile. I forgot about that.
Yeah, it did. Like this really dinky little bullet sprite. It was terrible. And then we used the Shadow Ball weapon as a sort of more defensive kind of thing that you would use to cancel out the projectiles from enemies. And then Eric June had a really great idea about the gun at some point during development.
Whoa, so first of all, with the gun being slow, also just a quick thing is that like Castlevania 1 and like the old ones are actually my favorite Castlevanias, and they do the same thing with you've got an attack that like obliterates enemies, but it's just really slow, and I kind of like the way that plays into the game. Like it's you plan your stuff. Like it's more about planning and less about like your twitch execution. But the idea that I feel really proud of with the gun is that originally what it was going to be was that you'd pull it out, you would shoot it, and that would kind of be how you did the gun, right? But I wanted to have, first of all, that the gun automatically loops, so you can just hold it down and keep shooting while it's out because that feels good. But also I just had this idea in my head because acceleration always feels good. Like what fundamentally always feels like just juicy in a game is when there's a change in the speed of something. So when you hold down the gun, it gets faster, which also plays really well with the fact that you're rooted. So if you are willing to be stuck somewhere, then the gun will become more powerful as you hold it down. And I think it just feels good to see and kind of hear it speeding up. And it's rewarding when you're able to plan like how to properly like take advantage of that fact.
Yeah, you really have to like commit to getting that top speed on the gun because you're standing in one place shooting for a long time. And I think a lot of credit to the gun feeling as good as it does also goes to our artist, Wayne, who did an incredible job on the art for the game. I basically was like, make it look like Momodora, because that's cool.
That.
And yeah, he delivered. So.
Oh, this is a shameful admission of us, though, now.
As someone who plays a lot of Metroidvanias, they're one of my favorite genres, Lore Finder really feels a lot like its own thing. Nothing else kind of has
Mm.
the same weight and feeling to controls, and I'm really into that because like pretty much everything feels like and this is not a complaint because both these games are great, but you know, most things seem to feel like Super Metroid or Symphony of the Night.
There's so many games, right? Like, and I feel like it's really important that you do something that feels different in some way.
I remember when you played the original Ludum Dare game. So this is actually a very interesting factoid. We barely tweaked the controls of the original Ludum Dare Jam game. Of course, we added stuff like the gun, but almost everything else is basically the speed is the same, the jump height is the same, the jump buffering is the same,
Yeah.
the grace period after you are in the air that you can still jump is still the same.
Coyote time. I learned that term recently, and I think it's amazing.
It's a great term. And I think Eric June, I remember when we were still, when you were still in the phase of, oh no, I don't have time for this. You were like, you really liked the movement. And I just I want to give myself credit for that, but I feel
Oh,
like
it's
I
good.
just stumbled into it feeling good.
In fact, I forgot about that because my memory's bad, but that was pretty much like a big part of what sold me on working on it too, alongside the ideas, was just that like the controls feel good. But the controls were also, it was almost hard to tell that God, I don't even know how to explain it, because it was a jam game, right? So it's very asset limited. So the characters like jump and fall animation didn't really look like you couldn't, they didn't stand out very much from each other, right? But like the actual move, like, so it looked kind of like a game where like, oh, the movement's maybe not great, like if you were just watching it. But when playing it, I was all like, wow, I have not once ever like tried to do a thing and then I did it wrong. Like I have always felt completely in control of all of my motion, and never have the controls become an issue for me. And that means that they're really good. Like if you don't think about the controls, at the end I was like, I didn't think about the controls once. That's incredible. Like
We
I don't know.
actually, we actually failed at that in one point that nobody seems to have noticed in the demo, because we did
Oh,
not
yeah?
have a grace period. No, we did. We had a grace period for jumping, wall jumping, but we did not have jump buffering for wall jumping. We really need to add that for the game. I noticed it at some point while I was playing the game for the millionth time to test it.
I've seen some people have trouble with the wall jumping too. Like I
Yeah.
watched Mari at Geek Remix. She stopped playing after she got the tentacle because she couldn't figure out the wall jumping, and I was all like, ah, dang it. Oh no, that's such a oh no.
Yeah, we definitely need to fix that. But fortunately, nobody else seems to really have had issues with it.
So movement was clearly really, really important to the game, and it really shows. Like honestly, I felt like even just watching it was like, this game looks like it moves incredibly. But why don't we talk about some of the other stuff that goes into, making a demo? So why don't we talk about the enemies and the boss designs a little bit?
Cool. Most of the enemies were actually already in the game, like from the Ludum Dare version. So
So we had the cultist, although they didn't have knife. So we already had that, and we had the eye bat thing, which did the swoop. So that AI is basically untouched from the Ludum Dare game all the way to the Kickstarter demo, which again, I want to give myself credit for that, but it was a game jam, so I kind of just lucked into it. Actually, the librarian mini boss, so we had tentacle cultists, but they were more like it's the regular cultist sprite with like Cthulhu head kind of thing, and they also throw fireballs. And the librarian was actually the librarian mini boss went into the full game from the jam game, basically untouched mechanically as well, except for like having a little cutscene and a little fade out and fade in on the teleport. And then Algarot, that was mostly that was Eric June.
Can you describe the final boss?
it's like a horrible, like alien-looking monster dog that screams portals into the walls and then jumps through them in order to teleport, and basically attacked by, like, the room is kind of 3 horizontal lanes, and it basically appears in one of the lanes because the portal will appear, and then shortly after the Algarot will leap out, do a shout to open its next portal, and then jump in. And you kind of have to be positioning yourself so as to not be getting slammed, but also you need to be shooting it. So, and then later on it starts doing some mix-ups where it starts shouting multiple portals, so you don't actually know which one it's going to come out of.
And the portals shoot fireballs. Also,
That's
Algarot
true,
is
right.
made out of ooze and tentacles. A good doggo.
You say Alderot is horrible, but I say Alderot is adorable.
I am very glad.
Well, we have those pictures, the teaser images from the Kickstarter, like where Casey, the protagonist, is playing with Algarot, is playing ball on the beach, and it's so cute.
Love it. Thanks. I love it so much.
How much money does the Kickstarter in the past had to have raised to get that into the game somehow? And where is the nearest time machine?
A fetch minigame?
I mean, I think more of a fetch main game with like a Metroidvania mini game, but yeah.
Maybe do like that Final Fantasy VIII companion game with the Chocobo, except do it with Algorot Tamagotchi game for Lore Finder.
A fun fact is when you play ball with Algorot, the value of pi for the ball starts to change.
Oh no!
That makes sense.
Definitely does seem Lovecraftian.
I love it so much.
So we actually won it with Algorot. You may have noticed that the game does not really have music. It has like ambient sounds as background music. But then when you get to the Algorot boss fight, it actually plays like this really dramatic choir gothic music. And we actually wanted to have... That was intentional. We went very Dark Souls on it. Again, I'm just giving away all my inspirations here. And we wanted to also do...
We went Bloodborne. Sorry.
Bloodborne, yeah. We wanted to do it where we showed like his name on screen, kind of like Ocarina of Time when you get to a boss, but we didn't have time to do that, unfortunately. But that will be in the main game, that dramatic reveal thing. It's gonna be a thing.
Okay. Why don't we talk a little bit about like the design of the map and the world?
Cool. So was pretty much all down to me. So there's a secret in Kitsune giant lore document I wrote that sort of describes a lot of the setting, and then also like the level design. I had a whole lot of thoughts on it, and now I am not remembering all of them. But I wanted to have it like you know how like in Sonic games, if you played Sonic games, there's a lot of different routes to the end of the stage. I kind of wanted to build the stage in a way that's sort of similar. There's a lot of like pathways and rooms in Lore Finder that could be considered redundant, and I think it's sort of important in order to actually give the feeling of freeform exploration, right? I don't think exploration really counts when it really comes down to it. You are having to do these hallways, just not always in the order that you think. Whereas in this case, right, like when you first enter, right, like there's the stairs and the hallway, right? So if you go forward, you end up in a slightly more difficult situation in that the ground floor of the mansion has a lot more enemies and specifically cultists walking around in it. But if you go up the stairs into the attic, there's a bit of a platforming challenge that you can use to sort of bypass them. But if you fall off the platforming challenge, it's not like you're going to fall into pits and die. You end up falling into like the dining room where all the cultists are hanging out. And that's sort of the idea I wanted, was to actually give the player sort of the freedom to route through it in different ways, and to kind of have events happen where like, oh, I goofed up the thing and now I'm in this dangerous situation, but I can get out of it, and for those things to kind of arise organically through play. And I think it makes speedrunning more interesting because it makes like lots of multiple different ways that a thing can be done, which means that the speedrunner has to actually think about all these different possibilities. And what with the way that the game is built, so that like the rooms are always changing as you gain stuff, this sort of format also, I think, heavily encourages like revisiting areas, and that plays well with that.
You did a really great job on the enemy placement as well, because you can only shoot horizontally. Especially with the gun, you can only shoot while you're on the ground. There is a frame perfect trick you can do. Fling yourself off an edge and shoot while you're in the air, but it's not very useful. But you did a really great job making sure that there's like a little puzzle element to where shall I stand in order to be able to gun down this enemy, or how should I approach it using the shadow ball.
Thank you. That was absolutely my Castlevania 1 and 3 influence, because that's how that game plays. It's literally just, oh, standing here means that this enemy on the other side gets hit by the axe perfectly, so stand here. The game Castlevania almost plays like a turn-based game when you really think about it, and I wanted to, I don't know, that was influenced by that, so there's me talking about one of my influences.
I never thought about Castlevania that way, but you're completely right.
Yeah.
So I do like the Symphony of the Night, right? But like the old ones, there's something special about it.
Big agree. I just gotta be honest for a second. Of all of the possible Lore Finder influences, I was not expecting Sonic. I was not expecting Sonic.
it's such an interesting way to design a level, right? Like, because it's just all, stay on the higher path, but it's more friendly to. I like things that allow failure to exist in more interesting ways than just like immediate like game punishment. Whereas like failure that is like I fall into a different section of the level tends to be more interesting, or like I have to take a different route because of the mistake I made.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, no, that's super cool. Okay, I think this is like the final thing for kind of running through this demo. So why don't we just like talk a little bit about, the visuals and the sound and like the general aesthetic design and how that maybe that interplays with the gameplay.
Okay. So that was mostly, like I said earlier, the art is all Wayne. And he did an amazing job. And we asked so much of him, like the Shadow Ball animation. He made it so that I was like, okay, with the Shadow Ball, I guess we have to split the sprite into like the legs and the torso so that you can do it like Mega Man and you can run and shoot at the same time. And he was like, no, I can make that work. And we just have a single animation that works regardless of whether you're walking on the floor, standing still, or doing it in the air. And it's amazing.
God, I love that efficiency.
He really nailed the mood of the game. Like it's very dark, and he did a great job also foregrounding where the platforms are. He uses very bright colors as a sort of outline everywhere, so that you always know, okay, I can stand on this and I can't stand on that. The only thing I guess it kind of failed on was the ladders that everyone tries to climb, and then it's like, why can't I climb ladders?
I had a friend yell at me for that. Not really, but
yeah. We're gonna make all the ladders disintegrate if you try and climb them in the full game. Just as a
good,
or maybe just
ladders.
have the one.
As a speedrunner, ladders are the worst. I'm happy about this development. Literally, this development.
I want to say that I for Wayne, like doing it's very important to me for like art to be vibrant, but like also you want it to be dark for a game like this, and I it's really wonderful how Wayne has so well pulled off this very like rich and colorful looking environment that still feels dusty and dark and glum, but isn't just like we've made it all gray, right? Like
the purples in the basement area.
Oh my gosh, yeah,
that's so good. And he makes the mansion area. He makes that look really warm with like reds and yellows and browns, and it's just really great. And then Yuzuki did the music, and he's done a bunch of stuff for horror games, including Pocket Mirror, which is super popular with some people on Tumblr. And so he has a lot of experience with that. So the ambience he did really well on. But actually the Algaroth boss fight music, where I was like, okay, make it like Dark Souls. And he's like, I don't know what Dark Souls music is like. So I linked him like Dark Souls 1, 2, and 3 boss music videos. And he's like, oh, okay, I've never done this, but I'll try. And he just completely nails it, which is amazing. And then the sound effects, that was all me. I basically did all the sound effects in like a day.
Those sound effects are incredible, by the way. Like, I was extremely impressed by that.
Did you record them yourself or synthesize them or what?
So I am an asset hog. Whenever I can get free assets, especially sounds, because you never have enough free sound packs lying around. I just grab.
So what I'm hearing is freesound.org.
No, freesound.org
Really?
is a nice addition when you really need something specific, but I've been using GDC free packs. I've bought a few sound packs that weren't that expensive, and that doesn't get you all the way there if you really want to have like oomph in your sounds. So I did all the sound effects for mid-boss, and I got better as I did it. And what you really want is, like, when you're doing art in Photoshop, what you want to do is have a lot of layers, a lot of effects, and once you combine them all, it looks cool. And with sound effect editing, it's basically the same thing. So the gun isn't just a sample of a gun, it's like 3 samples of a gun and like reverb and a whole bunch of other stuff to really make it like feel nice.
Yeah, the gun, as a sound designer, the gun was, it was crisp. It was so good.
Mm-hmm.
Thank you. I'm very, because I'm not trained for this. I just kind of taught myself on the job.
Even just like the footsteps sound great too. Like,
oh, we don't have footsteps. We have the little
jump sounds, right?
Jump.
Yeah.
Flutter, which, oh my God, getting the volume on that right was, I tweaked it like for hours. And we have the little landing shoe animation, which I can't remember what sound I used for that, but it definitely was not shoes. And then I made sure, because it got a little obnoxious, I made sure that you only hear the falling landing sound when you actually fall very far. And I keyed it so that if you are running downstairs, like in the mansion, that is the jump out height where you don't hear it. So that you don't hear it if you're falling a little bit, but if you're falling a lot, you hear it. And then Algorod was, oh my God, it was one of the best sound effects I did for mid-boss. The fear sound effect, which is like the shrieking sound. And then I layered a whole bunch of other stuff over it. And oh yeah, the Algorod death sound, that was fun. So if you ever want crunching sounds, cabbages.
Oh my God, that's cabbage?
Slicing cabbage or cracking ice or snow.
I'm loving this sound design talk so much. Oh my god.
I'm just envisioning Algoroth now just like going, oh no, I'm dead, and like crushing cabbages together between its hands.
Yeah.
Oh no, I've died, you've
Exactly.
killed me, stop shooting me, I'm already dead. Ah.
Well,
Your final time for the speed run was flat.
the best thing I've ever done is the little UI clicky sounds in mid-boss when you drag and drop items in your inventory. You want to know what it is?
Oh,
Umbrella sounds.
I love
Oh,
sound
nice.
design so much. Oh my gosh.
It's great when you wrap your head around it and you're like, okay, I need something that sounds like this, but it can be something totally different. I don't care.
I know we've said this more times than you'd think we should have said this, but if you're a Foley artist, please get in contact with us. We want you on the podcast.
Please. Oh my god, I would die happy if we got to talk to a Foley artist.
All right, I think it's about time we move into the listener questions. If you ever have questions for us or our guests, you can email us at settingtherecordqueer@gmail.com, contact us on Twitter at strqueercast, or you can join our Discord at bit.ly/STRQcord. So we had a bunch of questions for this episode, but our guests were just too good and have already answered most of them.
I mean, are you really surprised that the queer cosmic horror Metroidvania people are actually time travelers? Because
Stop
I'm not.
lore finding your way into our listener questions.
Anyways,
That's
When you realize that space and time are the same thing, you can just sort of step between them.
that's what we did. We went into our time machine and we went back to Lovecraft's time and we snatched it out of his hands and was like, it's ours now.
Yep.
Stop being a racist ass. All right,
I
bye.
can't believe that Lovecraft had the listener questions the whole time. He stole them from the future. Anyway, you missed one.
our one surviving listener question came
Oh
from
my.
Violet Moon in Discord, who asked, "What's the hardest part that you didn't expect about running a Kickstarter campaign?"
I guess the hardest part was really getting people to like talk about the Kickstarter, because so you get the stats when you look at your Kickstarter dashboard. And if you're clever, you can use these custom referral links so you can really track where all your pledges are coming from. And like I think a good third or more basically came from either me on the Discord, like telling people who were very into it, like, oh, it's live now, you can pledge, or the newsletter for our business, or in most cases, Twitter. People are very keen to retweet and signal boost that way, but at a certain point, if you have like 4,500 Twitter followers, which sounds like a lot, that will not get your game funded on Kickstarter. That will not give you the almost $20,000 that our Kickstarter game brought in. With just my Twitter following, we would not have gotten funded even. And it really, the big part is getting people to talk about it, like doing their own tweets, talking about it in Discord, saying like, oh, this is really cool, you guys need to check this out, you need to, put money towards this, and making their own tweets, talking in Discord, that kind of thing. That is the hardest, because some days it just feels like you're repeating the same tweet that you've rephrased like 2 million ways already, and it's like the 15th day of a 30-day Kickstarter, and it's just like shouting into the void. It's really demotivating, actually, and that I did not expect it
Yeah.
would be that hard.
It drains a special type of energy from you, I think, that you don't even know exists normally.
Yeah. At first, I was like, "Oh God, the crunch period for making the demo is over, and this other stuff, that's fine. That's just doing some tweetins. I can do some tweetins. I do tweetins every day."
You just end tweeting it.
Yeah, but I had to like do like 8 tweets or something, 8 to 10 to 12 tweets every day. And it's just ceaseless because you don't get a day off. Because if you don't tweet for a day, then you don't get pledges for a day. And you just can't do that. And that is also very hard. It is extremely draining. I don't know if Eric June has anything to add.
I mean, I was doing about two to three a day. Because I think there's some pretty strong diminishing returns after that. But like, I had a similar experience of just like going like, oh my god, I feel weirdly like you sort of start to feel like you're a door-to-door salesman or something. I guess is like. I don't know
Yeah.
how to describe it. Yeah, like
And even when people like reach out to you and say like, "Oh, this is so cool," it's like even that you're so drained. And this is gonna sound awful, but like it happens frequently enough while you're running a Kickstarter like this, even at a small scale like we were, that it's like, "Oh yeah, thank you," and you feel like completely ungenuine saying that, and then you completely forget that this person reached out to you, and it has like no emotional impact, which is so sad because that is the best part of being a game developer.
mhm.
It is just soul grinding.
That experience is really weird because yeah, it's like how many ways can you say thank you? You start to get like a form letter like automatically forms, but you know like the moment that you type out that same way of saying thank you, you know that you haven't really engaged with the person in a way that you'd want to, but you don't really know how to anymore because you've said thank you too many times. So it's like
Yeah, and there's not enough left of you to really engage beyond that. So
you
I
are
just,
thankful though. To be clear, we're all very thankful of everyone.
yeah, you are very, very thankful. It just doesn't,
It's hard to bring it to the surface and express it
Yeah.
like in a real way.
I just added heart emojis after a while to my thank you. So there was thank you, exclamation mark, heart emoji. You have to know I'm genuine. There's an exclamation mark and a heart emoji.
Smiley face is how I do it.
Smiley face is also good, yeah.
Hey, our patrons, we appreciate you.
So we're gonna move in here to our final segment of the podcast, which is Kaylee's question of the week, which is like, typical, like, did you enjoy your new vacuum cleaner survey-esque questions?
Oh, that's my favorite one yet.
Anyway, just normal questions that we're still not sure why we keep separate from the, normal questions. But this week's question is, what lore would you have to find to journey into the Lore Finder mansion?
How do I make Snake?
Alexis, you know how to program. You know how to make Snake.
I need to know the lore. How do I make Snake? Anyways, carry on. I've been preparing that joke for like 20 minutes, okay?
Nice.
That's dedication.
I'm just going in for that. I'm just going in for that Coca-Cola secret recipe. Need it. Gonna make my own Coke.
You two? Any thoughts?
Let's see. Immortality. I'll take that. Nothing big.
Nothing big like how to make Snake.
No, I'd probably die. I'd probably die. That's a terrible idea.
Go big or go home.
Body reshaping or something, I guess. I don't know.
Statistically, if you weigh the pros and cons, there's a non-zero chance you'll live, which means that there's infinite value in terms of your current lifespan if you take a probabilistic view at this.
Yeah, like if I've just got like my value function on the AI in my head that's like, oh, well, infinite life is worth infinity times 0.1% equals also infinity. Okay, do it. Like
yeah, exactly.
I glitch out and I go into the mansion and probably die. I think that's what happens there.
What's a 99.9% chance of like 100 years versus a 0.01% chance of infinite years?
It's math checks out.
Yeah, math doesn't lie.
How about you, Eniko?
The lore that lets me snap my fingers and create a plate of fries.
Oh, that's pretty good.
Oh, that's really good.
That's the one for me. Also, be able to eat the fries without getting fat. Just get the whole package. It's two lores, but there's multiple lores in the mansion, so it's okay.
The lore of infinitely and perfectly enjoying French fries. It's one package deal.
You just get to like the heart of the mansion, and it's just a piece of paper that says McDonald's drive-thru.
No, McDonald's fries aren't good enough. That's not worth it.
They're good when they're fresh, but they become horrible when they're cold.
Anyways, if you have a good answer to that question of the week, please email us, tweet it at us, say it in our Discord. Every week we feature our favorite answers to the question of the week at the end of the podcast. And with that, that's pretty much everything. Thank you both so much for coming on and telling us all this wonderful stuff about your games and your game projects and your whole history and development. This has been super wonderful.
Thank you for
Thanks.
having us.
Yeah, thank you so much for having us. It's been really fun.
I had a fun time too.
Good. So, where can our listeners find you and your games?
You can find me at Critterdust on Twitter and Critterdust on itch.io. And I've got a art blog called towerofthemoon.tumblr.com that I think you should check out just if you want to look at that.
And me, you can find all of Kitsune Games' games, which always sounds a little awkward, at kitsunegames.com. You can find me on Twitter at Enichan, ENICHAN. You can find Bravely Bound at bravelybound.com. And you can find our company Twitter at KitsuneGamesCom.
I was trying to think of like a joke to play off of that, and it didn't come to me. But anyways, we'll roll on past that. We'll slide past like a snake, slithering on to the ending of the podcast. Slowly, but with determination. If you enjoyed this podcast, please maybe consider supporting us on Patreon at patreon.com/settingtherecordqueer. Our patrons can get early guest reveals, a special patrons exclusive Discord channel, high quality or early episode releases, and even potentially special thanks on the podcast. Otherwise, please, if you liked this podcast, leave a review, tell a friend, please talk about us on social media. You can talk about us and get in contact with us on our Twitter at STRQueercast. Via email, settingtherecordqueer@gmail.com, and in our Setting the Record Queer community Discord, where you can hang out with your hosts, a bunch of other listeners, and even some of the podcast guests who have decided to grace us with their presence at bit.ly/strqcord. While you're there, feel free to ask questions for our upcoming guests or for us, or send us feedback or ideas for the podcast. Maybe you have a good idea for who or what could be on this podcast, or maybe you think you'd be a good fit for this podcast. Hit us up. We're always open to cool ideas for new episodes. Our logo was made by Cubotic at QBTIC on Twitter, or Cobot, QOBOT.tumblr.com. Our theme music was composed by Thrill Me Music, and you can find more information about her work at thrillmemusic.squarespace.com. This podcast was edited by Kaylee and produced by yours truly, Alexis. Kaylee, where can our listeners find you?
People can find me on Twitter at WitchesHex, that's WITCHS Hex, or on Twitch at WitchesHex with an underscore between Witches and Hex.
And you can find us as Proto Magical Girl on Twitch and YouTube, or Twitch at proto.ml, and on Twitter and Instagram as Princess Proto. Our next episode, episode 13, is going to be about tattoo artistry, and we're going to be speaking to Jackie Siu of Paper Crane Tattoo Studio. That's all for this episode of Setting the Record Queer, and we will see y'all 2 weeks from now. Bye-bye.
Bye.
I have a closing remark.
Oh, go ahead.
Do you think it would be easier to program Snake if you knew parcel code?
It's time to set the record queer. Have you made Snake today?
You gotta inflect it like a question. Have you made Snake today?
Oh, I was trying to do it like, it's 5 p.m. Do you know where your children are?
They're making Snake.
Good.
Have you warned your children about the dangers of making Snake?
Anyways.